Hello, everybody. This is the AALS section on global engagement, and welcome to our webinar for today. Our webinar will be on artificial intelligence, and in particular, the relationship between artificial intelligence and our international law students, international students being LLMs, international LLM students, and also international JD students as well, students who speak English as a second language. And our speaker for today is Mimi Samuel from the Seattle University School of Law. Those of you who have been to our sessions at AALS or Global Legal Skills or other conferences will know her well. I'm going to give just a brief bio because a long one isn't needed. She's well known in our field and an eminent scholar. But after practicing commercial litigation for 8 years, she joined academia, and Professor Samuel has worked with law students, judges, not only in the US, but in keeping with our global legal skills and global engagement field, she has worked all around the world. She won a Fulbright scholarship, and she has worked in, I gotta read these, Mimi, Afghanistan, Botswana, China, Ethiopia, India, Kenya, Liberia, Russia, South Africa, and Uganda. Wow. She's also won the Global Legal Skills Award and the LWI Terry Leclerc Courage Award. So she has been recognized as a leading light in our field. And today she's going to be talking about the possible use of AI with teaching students professional register. Now, probably all of you are familiar with the term professional register, but just in case you aren't, my homegrown definition of it is the type of writing style and level of writing discourse that we use as lawyers to communicate with the various audiences that we are dealing with, whether that is other attorneys, people at our firms, judges, mediators, clients, the whole ball of wax. So maybe we'll be talking about that. And right before we get started, I just want to do a little piece of housekeeping. Since this is the first time we're going public with global engagements sessions for this year. In addition to today's webinar, we've got what we think is a really exciting session in January at the annual meeting in San Francisco, which will again be about this same general topic, AI and international students. And it's called AI, the Promise and the Pitfalls. It'll be Friday, just after lunch, 12:50 p.m. on January 10th. And we really hope to see everybody who comes to San Francisco there. And one final blurb that I'd like to give before we get started. Many of us are in the global legal skills community, and they've just announced new information for the Global Legal Skills Conference for 2025. Mimi and I were at the last one in Italy, in Bari in 2024, and it was amazing. And I'm sure the new one in 2025 will be just as amazing. It's going to be held in Brno, Czechia. And if you're not familiar with Czechia, it's the Czech Republic. After Czechoslovakia split up, that's the part that's got Prague. And Brno is a large and lovely city in the Czech Republic. And that's where it'll be starting on May 28th. Already the information to sign up for the conference, registration information has been sent out. But if you haven't received it yet, just you can just Google Global Legal Skills Conference and find the information. And we hope to see you there too as well. Okay, enough advertisements. Let's get started. So Mimi, please take us away.
Thanks, John, and thanks for that generous introduction. I totally agree on the global legal skills. Looking forward to Czech Republic in the spring, and we had a great time in Bari last time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see, not going to work. So, as John said, today's presentation is on using AI to teach professional register to international law students. And this presentation builds on a presentation that I did with my colleague Laurel Oates in Bari just this past year. And then that one actually built on a presentation that we did in Monterey at a global legal skills conference probably about 5 years ago now. So I want to, as I said, thank John for inviting me. I also want to just acknowledge that Laurel did a lot of the work that we are going to look at today in terms of some of the initial exercises that I've then converted to see how Gen AI can use them. Laurel wanted to be here. I know some of you, many of you, I saw the names, know her. She's retired now and she is traipsing around East Africa. So while we will miss her, we're not feeling sorry for her at all right now because she's on safari. So here's what we're going to talk about today. 2 questions. One with subparts because I'm a lawyer, but 2 questions essentially. One, what is register and why is it hard for law students, particularly international students, to learn how to choose and write in an appropriate register? And I won't spend too long on that part because, as John said, I think most of us are familiar with that topic, and I very much agree with the way John has framed it. So I'll just go through my slides on that quickly. But then really getting into, can we use generative AI to help students understand both how to choose an appropriate register and to learn the characteristics of specific registers. And I will show you the way I have taken some of those traditional exercises that we've done with register and adapted them to generative AI. At the end, we'll have time for some Q&A and some comments. And what I'm really interested in, obviously, is questions, but also other, ways we can all think about how we can use this. So before we get into it, I want to just give a couple of caveats and a couple of framing points. The caveats are that is, I'm not a linguist and I'm not an expert in AI. I do have experience, as John said, working with students, working with judges, magistrates, lawyers, internationally, and on writing in an appropriate register, but that's not my area of expertise in terms of my background. So those are my caveats. I have 2 framing points on Gen AI. One, the way I think about Gen AI, and that's what this graphic here is I think about it as this incredibly powerful, but also potentially flawed tool that we've all been given that does not come with a user manual. So here we are, here's this thing, and it's not even a thing, it's many things, no user manual. And I really think it's up to us as teachers to sort of crowdsource that user manual, basically take our area of expertise, brainstorm, experiment with ChatGPT and other Gen AI tools. How could these be helpful? And then share them with everyone else. And so that's basically what I'm giving you, is just me playing around and things that I come up with that I think are helpful. But I think together we can all figure out ways of using it and using it effectively. The other framing comment I want to give is that, there's a lot, I'm sure we all are attending a lot of these webinars and sessions and in-house things on ChatGPT, and opinions range from this is going to put us all out of business, we're going to be taken over by the robot overlords, and students will never write anything on their own, they're just going to use this and they'll cheat, quote unquote. I want to emphasize that the way I'm attempting to use ChatGPT with these exercises is as a teaching and learning tool. So I'm not suggesting that they be used as a replacement for student writing. I'll show you ways to maybe make some templates that students can use, but I want to make sure that I'm not saying that I'm expecting students to use these to write, to generate documents, but to use them as a teaching and learning tool. I see that I'm not going to monitor the chat while we're doing this, so I'm just going to tell you that. So John, if you see something, you can jump in and let me know, but otherwise it's one thing too many for me to do.
Well, maybe would you prefer if we wait till the end when you're finished for the questions, or if I see something in the chat, can I jump in with it, or?
Feel free to jump in. I'm fine with that. Just let me know, but I'm not going to look at it. I'm just telling you that.
Okay.
So John defined register, and absolutely exactly what he said. It's the level of formality with which we write. And just like we would choose clothing that is the appropriate level of formality for the particular event that we're going to, we choose an appropriate level of formality for particular types of writing. The question is, why is it hard for law students? And I actually think it's hard for all law students, but really hard for international students to learn how to choose and write in an appropriate register. In large part because register involves not only language, but culture. And so it's both the US culture and US legal culture. So even our students who are born and bred, in the US and learn English, know English, they still don't know US legal culture. And certainly for our international students who don't speak English as their first language, but even those who come from cultures where law is practiced in English, it's a very different legal culture, very often a very different legal English that they're being used. So there's really just a lot of cultural aspects to it in addition to language. The other reason, or many other reasons, that choosing the right register involves so many writing choices, content, organization, sentence structure, word choice, so many different nuanced decisions. Students also receive really mixed messages from a variety of sources. The two that come to my mind are the opinions that they read. So we may say, write in plain English, and then they read these opinions in their case books that are nothing but. They may receive mixed messages from mass media about these very aggressive attorneys and how they're acting and how they're approaching and trying to write the way they imagine these fictitious lawyers are acting. And it can also be really hard to find good models, particularly of less formal documents like emails or correspondence. It can be easier to find good models, obviously, of contracts, even of briefing, but sort of those less formal documents that lawyers are doing day in and day out, it's hard to find good models. So I'll talk about a variety of different types of writing, but I am going to focus on correspondence. So, a couple of things here. This is the overview of what I'm going to talk about. One, I'm going to show how I've primed the system to make sure that when I say the system, the ChatGPT, how it and I are using the same vocabulary and how we're using them consistently. Then I'm going to show you some what I'm calling traditional register exercises that both Laurel and I have used for many years with international audiences. I'll tell you how we did them traditionally, because I think they're good exercises traditionally, but then how I've updated them for ChatGPT. And then at the end, I'll show you how I use Gen AI to help show students how to choose an appropriate register and create templates. And I've got some different scenarios that we can use. Just one thing to tell you is all these examples I did for free with ChatGPT 3.5 and 4. I'll show you a little bit. I did, as John said, I did a presentation in May in Bari, and then I took everything in, it was last week or this week, who knows at this point of the semester, but I updated them. What I got now was substantially similar to what I did in May, but it's always a little bit different. So most of what I'm showing you is from the October version, but I'll show you where I got some different responses each time I did it. I'll also tell you on the very last slide, I will give you the link, or not, maybe Julia did it already. I'll give you the link to my ChatGPT conversation. So I'll be showing you excerpts with these slides, but I'll give you the link to the whole thing, and you're welcome to take and use whatever you want from it.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here.
Sure.
It is actually the first link right at the top of the webinar chat. So Julia posted that link.
Okay.
HTTPS link right at the beginning. So that's the link.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, so priming the system. So when I'm using ChatGPT, it's really important for me to make sure it is speaking the same language that I am, at least to start. So when I first started this exercise, I just asked it, do you know what register is in terms of formality of writing? Because I didn't know if this was something that it would know. And so what it told me when I asked the first time in May, it says yes. Writing refers to the level of formality or style. It encompasses things like vocabulary choice, sentence structure, and tone. There are typically three main registers: formal, and it gives a definition of formal, academic writing, official documents, professional correspondence, serious and respectful tone, complex vocabulary, precise grammar, respectful tone. Then neutral, most commonly used every day, newspapers, magazines, non-specialized texts. Characteristics are clarity and straightforwardness without being overly formal or casual. And then informal, used in casual communication, conversations with friends, personal emails, social media, colloquial language, contractions, and a relaxed tone. And then I asked it, actually, let me just actually, before I do that, that's what it gave me in May. In October, it gave me a slightly different answer. In October, it gave me frozen or static, formal, consultative, casual, and intimate. So it changed its answer a little bit. I'm going to go, I have another slide that goes through these in a little bit more detail. But what I did when I first asked it is I then said, when it just gave me those three neutral, formal and informal, I asked it that for the registers that I use, intimate, casual, consultative, deliberate, and oratorical. Those are the ones that when I've taught this, the ones that I've known, that I've learned about. And so I asked it if it was familiar with those, and it said yes. And so when I've taught students traditionally about register, these are the 5 that I've used. Intimate being, close friends, family members; casual being relaxed and informal; family, friends, and peers. And then what I like about the way it explains this, and students could obviously ask these same questions, is not only does it describe the register, but it gives some characteristics. So for example, in casual, slang, colloquial expressions, incomplete sentences are appropriate, tone is conversational, doesn't require strict adherence to grammar rules, and is adaptable. The audience's level of familiarity. Consultative, being a moderately formal register used in professional education settings. It's polite, respectful, informative, but less rigid. Then it gets into deliberate, the formal level of communication that's carefully structured, often used in writing that aims to be precise and accurate for academic or professional writing. It avoids slang and colloquialism. And then oratorical, sometimes called rhetorical, sometimes called frozen, is formal and ceremonial, often used in speeches, sermons, legal proceedings. It often employs rhetorical devices, elevated vocabulary, etc. So I think it does a nice job of explaining. So one of the exercises that Laurel and I came up with that we talked about, I think in Monterey in 2018, is we would have students rewrite each of these scenarios in all 5 of the registers that we talked about. The scenarios are 2 parents talking about a child's bad report card, 2 business partners discussing whether to lease a new office, a person accused of assault claiming she acted in self-defense, a lawyer telling a client he's not likely to win his case, and a judge imposing sentence on a person convicted of trespass for sleeping on public property. And our goals with these exercises were for students to see how in sort of the easy cases, for example, the parents or the judge, sort of the 2 on the extreme ends, how sort of ridiculous it sounded when they wrote it in the wrong register, particularly when they were on the opposite end of the spectrum, that there really is an appropriate register for different types of communications. And for the extreme cases, it's pretty easy to see. The ones in the middle, it's a little bit harder and more nuanced, and sometimes it's not necessarily the right register, but a right register, consultative, deliberative. There may be more than one that's appropriate, but having students think about how they would write in each of those registers, it also can be kind of fun and funny, and I'll show you some examples of that, so it's a fun way to talk about it. But then what I decided to do was maybe ChatGPT, maybe AI can do this. So I gave it this prompt: write a conversation between 2 parents discussing their child's bad report card in each of the registers listed in the previous response. And so to me, this is helpful, particularly if students don't have the command of English to get the nuance that they might need to actually do the exercise on their own. So I might have the students do all of those exercises that I set out, or maybe do 1 or 2, and then maybe try 1 or 2 on their own. But this is sort of a building block to see how someone else being the system, could do it. So it did a pretty nice job. Here's the answer I got for the intimate register back in May. And I'm not going to show you May and October for everything, but here I think there's an interesting distinction I want to point out. So it said, sure, here's a conversation between 2 parents discussing their child's bad school report card in each of the registers. Intimate. Parent 1, hey, did you see Timmy's report card? It's not looking good. Parent 2, Yes, I saw that. It's a bit worrying, isn't it? I thought he was doing better. Parent 1, yes, I know. We need to figure out how to help him. Parent 2, definitely. Maybe we should sit him down and talk about what's going on. Parent 1, agreed. He may be struggling with something and not telling us. So it does a nice job of that. One thing I thought was interesting, I did it again in October, and all of a sudden the parents had genders. We've got a mom and a dad. So AI has a bias. Those biases we know come through in a variety of different ways. I was actually quite surprised it went from giving me an unbiased version in May, and then it imported this bias in October. So, just keeping in mind, like I said, it is a powerful but flawed tool. The content is similar, but I just thought it was an interesting thing to point out. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but then we get the consultative register, which is a little bit more formal, but then we get to the oratorical register. And this is where it can be kind of fun and points out the importance of the appropriateness of the register. Parent 1, as we gather here today, I bring your attention to the matter of Timmy's recent report card, which has caused us considerable concern. Parent 2, indeed, my fellow parent, the grades presented therein are a grave departure from the standards we've come to expect. Parent 3, it is imperative we undertake a concerted effort to ascertain the root causes of this decline and to devise a comprehensive plan for remediation. Parent 2, let us unite in purpose, summoning the wisdom of educators and resolve of parents to ensure that Timmy's academic journey is guided by excellence and diligence. And I think even for students for whom English is not their first language, they can see how incredibly inappropriate this very formal register is when it comes to an intimate conversation. And so playing around, there's a lot of ways to play with this, but it shows those differences. A more realistic prompt might be something like this. This is a letter that comes from the textbook that we use, that Laurel has written. And it comes from his chapter on plain language, where we had 3 versions of the letter. One is much too casual, one is much too formal, one is just right and professional. It's what I call the Goldilocks example. And it's a letter written by a lawyer to clients he does not, or potential clients actually, that he doesn't know. These potential clients are inquiring about the possibility of a private adoption. So what I asked it to do was rewrite this same letter in each of the registers listed above. And it did that. Here's the intimate register. And remember, this is someone he's never met before. Dear Pat and Chris, thanks for reaching out. I got your letter. I'll need some official paperwork. And it's very, very casual. All the best. It's Ken. It's no longer Kenneth Q. And so it's very casual. Then it's the oratorical again, which always sounds a little ridiculous. I hereby acknowledge receipt, your aspirations to become adoptive parents, so on and so forth. Nevertheless, I shall instruct my legal aid to keep your correspondence on file. And then the consultative, which is really the professional. And it could be fun for you to generate these types of letters, or the students to do it themselves, and ask them which one is the most appropriate and why. And typically, they will choose the consultative. What is trickier, though, is the why. Why is this most appropriate? Why is this professional writing? It's harder to pick out. And I will always ask, well, what words or phrases are inappropriate in the others or appropriate here? Trying to get to what makes something professional writing. Another way I've used it is to ask the ChatGPT to evaluate the register. So it's that same letter I just looked at, and the prompt is the following letter written in an appropriate register for an attorney communicating with prospective clients for the first time regarding a potential adoption? So I'm asking it, and when I get to the prompts on correspondence, I'm in these prompts reinforcing the basic concepts that we talk about all the time of audience, purpose, and conventions. Talking about who is the audience for this letter, what is the purpose? The letter itself is a convention, and asking ChatGPT to evaluate the register. And it comes back, quite frankly, with the answer I would have given. And it says, hang on, I got to move John out of the way there. Hang on a sec, there you are. This letter generally maintains a professional tone, appropriate for an attorney communicating. However, it leans towards being overly formal and somewhat detached, particularly given the sensitive and personal nature of adoption. For first-time communication with prospective adoptive parents, a consultative register would be more suitable. This would convey professionalism while also appearing approachable and empathetic. Here are some considerations. And this is what I particularly like, is it's not just evaluating, but it's giving examples. Here's some complex vocabulary that's too formal. Cognizant of the fact, considerably more. Adoptive placements are quite formal and may come across as impersonal. These are the nuances sometimes our students who don't have English as their first language might not get in the language. The tone and empathy. Adoption is a personal and emotional process. Using more conversational tone with empathetic language will help prospective clients feel supported. For instance, acknowledging the couple's interest in adoption and offering reassurance would enhance the letter's warmth. That's not legal, right? That's not a legal issue, but so often students really struggle. I'm a lawyer, I have a lawyer-client relationship, but yet this is a personal matter. I don't know how much I can be personal. I don't know how to frame those personal sort of aspects to it, particularly, quite frankly, our younger students who don't have the life experience necessarily to be able to convey these kinds of things with the appropriate language. Then finally, it says the letter could benefit from more straightforward language. Terms like nonetheless and authorizing my legal assistant add a layer of distance and give some suggestions instead. So honestly, it's a lot of the feedback I would give. Another thing I've asked it to do is show its work. So here, this is a little bit of a snippet from a Ugandan judgment written by a Ugandan judge. And I say, rewrite the following paragraph so it's still professional, less formal. And this is what I was sort of alluding to earlier, that lawyers who may come from English-speaking jurisdictions, but where the way the English is spoken from a cultural perspective might be different from the directness that's preferred in the US system. So it gives me a response. And then I asked it, well, what did you do? What did you change? And that to me is the most important part, right? So doing the change is one thing, but explaining what it's done and why is where the learning process comes in, as far as I'm concerned, because then the students can take these explanations, not only use with respect to these particular examples, but then figure out going forward, how can I adapt and do that myself? So it says, I replace some of the more formal language, I combine some sentences, I remove some redundancy, I updated for clarity and accessibility, always with examples. So to me, it's the showing its work is what I think is really helpful here. The last thing I'm going to show you are some prompts that I came up with, and I have 5 different examples. They each take the same format, so I'll just kind of walk you through them and point out some of the highlights. But in each, I've given a prompt that it's correspondence to whom, and actually, let me just say, they increase in terms of complexity and nuance. So I kind of just started off with, in what register should an attorney write to a client in the US who the attorney has represented for 5 years? We don't know what kind of case it is. We don't know where we are in the case. We don't know what it's about, but I just kind of tried to give a little bit of flesh to what the relationship was. For each response, ChatGPT gave me, without me prompting, an explanation, and then a template, and then a little bit further explanation. So, kind of response, template, and explanation. So the response tells me, you should use the consultative register for a long-term client. It strikes the balance between professional and approachability. It's important in an established relationship. So it's changing based on the factor that I gave it, the length of the relationship. Professional yet personable tone, clear and accessible language, politeness and empathy. Down under that one, a consultative tone allows for expressions of empathy or concern that can reassure the client, which is especially important in useful or complex matters. And then the level of formality, and then it'll say, like, maybe it might be appropriate here to use first names. It gives even the closings, best regard or all the best. Sometimes students don't know sort of the nuance between the salutations and the greetings. It then, without me asking, gave a little template. Now, I don't know. It starts off, I hope this message finds you well, exclamation point. I don't know that I would suggest that. So, it definitely needs some sort of nuanced fixing. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but I wouldn't. And then it gives a little bit of a template could be adapted for what the particular subject matter is. It then gives me an explanation. What are some of the key elements? The tone starts with a friendly greeting, expresses hope for the client's well-being, which adds a personal touch. Legal terms are avoided or explained simply. Encouragement and support. Closing is warm and friendly, reinforcing the established relationship. So not only what to say, but why to say it. Use a closing that helps to, really cement that relationship. I then asked it, what register should an attorney use to write a demand letter? Not surprisingly, it gives me a slightly more formal register with more formal language, clarity and precision, an objective tone, some suggestions on organization, respectful but firm. So not sort of crazy over the top language, be firm but respectful. And then it gives me a little bit of a template, and it gives me brackets where I can fill in. Now, granted, my case might be entirely different, but a standard type of demand letter for a personal injury. And it gives, where the information should be filled in. To me, this is just like going, for a form book. As I said at the beginning, we typically don't have very many of those for correspondence writing. So we're able to create some templates. One thing I love about ChatGPT is just the number of examples it can create and the speed through which it creates these examples. So that might put us out of a job, but we often create these examples for our students, and these templates, they're time consuming. They're hard to do. We spend a lot of time doing that. We can do it. They can do it. We can come up with all different kinds of scenarios. So again, kind of gives us the why. Hang on a second. Oops. Yeah. And then it gives us a bit of an example of what that's going to look like. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble there. Okay. The third one I did, what register should an attorney use when writing an email to co-counsel? And it tells me with co-counsel, you want a consultative register, strikes a balance. You want to be collegial and collaborative. I'm going to point out number 3 under here because some of the others are similar to what we've seen before. Let's use inclusive language like we or our. Fosters a sense of teamwork and collaboration, which is important in a co-counsel relationship. And again, it gives us an example of an email. Even the structure, the other 2 examples were typical letters on letterhead. Now it's showing me an example of an email. Again, it's big with the exclamation points, which I'm not, but that's me. Looking forward to hearing from you. I think I put a comma there, but nonetheless, it's giving, something that someone can use on their own. I'm going to just move through in the interest of time. 2 more that I did where I said get a little bit more nuanced and complex. What register should a lawyer use to write to a client in the US who's not being cooperative or has not paid their bills? And so sometimes I worry that students think that they need to be really harsh and demanding in this kind of situation. They don't really, or they're really afraid to be direct and forward with the client. So how do I approach a difficult situation? And so it gives some suggestions. Should use formal language, be clear and objective. Number 4, I particularly like, despite the issues, the attorney should remain respectful and avoid confrontational language. The approach can help maintain the attorney-client relationship while addressing the concerns. And again, it gives me a template, gives me some key elements. And then the last one I did, and you could do obviously a million of these. What register should an attorney use with a client in the United States who has contacted the attorney to ask about taking on a medical malpractice case against a doctor who misdiagnosed the client's spouse's illness and the spouse died as a result? And so a sensitive factual matter. And here, without me saying sensitive legal matter, it says use the deliberate register for sensitive legal matters. Talks about being empathetic, talks about making sure the client knows what steps are going to be taken, and the kinds of things that help someone figure out what to say and how to say to someone in a very sensitive way. Again, a template letter, and again, some key elements of why the template looks the way it does. So to me, those are just some of the examples of some of the things I've done. What kind of exercises can we do with our students? So one, that I think is obvious and comes to mind, is brainstorm audience and purpose variables that would be important to choosing register and correspondence. So some of the ones that we've seen in my examples: the nature of the relationship between the author and the recipient, the length of that relationship, the subject matter of the correspondence, the method of correspondence. Is it a letter? Is it email? And there's many more. So this could be something, so students, so they're thinking about all these different variables and then trying them out. A couple others that have come to my mind: have students generate their own prompts and then evaluate the prompts that ChatGPT provides. Do they think that it's doing a good job? Have them draft correspondence and ask ChatGPT to evaluate the appropriateness of the register. And you could have them try and draft it in the right register, or have them draft it in the wrong register and have it see what it does. Have them find a piece of writing they think is an inappropriate register and ask ChatGPT to write it. Either it's too informal or it's too formal. And then I'm curious, kind of at the Q&A part, what other ideas some of you might have. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm happy to hear ideas, thoughts, questions, concerns. I know not everybody is as jazzed about this as I am. So I'm happy, if you what you think might be problems with it, but we're now at a let's open it up part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, Mimi. I thought it was really stimulating, really interesting, and hopefully opened up a lot of possibilities, not only in my mind, but the minds of everybody who's listening today. One interesting thing I thought you said at the end is not everybody may be as positive about this as me. And I was thinking at the end where something was written in an inappropriate register, and students might say, oh, I'll have ChatGPT rewrite this for me. I was wondering, some students might say, hey, you know what? That'll work on my on the office memo I have to write in my first semester class. Maybe I'll write it, and if my writing's pretty crappy, I can get ChatGPT to rewrite it one section at a time for me. And as a result, that's a concern that a lot of us have. And here's what I wanted to ask you. Do you put any limits or constraints on the way your students use ChatGPT? And what about, your department? What about at Seattle U? Does it have any department-wide legal writing policies in this regard? Or is it up to each individual professor to decide if or how much they can allow students to experiment with ChatGPT and aiding their own writing?
Yeah. So that's a multi-layered question, John. So let me take it. So our whole university has a policy, which is basically you can't use it each professor can do their own rules. You can't use it to generate things, I think, unless the professor says you can. And then let me just say, within our legal writing department, our LLM students fall outside the jurisdiction of legal writing. So, but I did ask the person who's teaching those LLMs yesterday, because I expected this question, and I can tell you what she said. For our JD students, we have a policy. I'm happy to share it if anyone is interested. And I will tell you, we wrote that policy for the first time summer of 22, when all this stuff was coming out, when we were seeing these articles about hallucinations, when we were all just starting. And I remember that conversation distinctly, because we had the legal writing faculty together, and we had one faculty member who said, absolutely, we must prohibit this. And we had another faculty member who said, look, it's out there. They're going to use it in practice. We can't stop them, and we shouldn't stop them. And that was the beginning of our conversation. We eventually came to something, but it's a 1.5-page long policy that basically says this. It says, we can't prohibit you because we can't police it. It doesn't start off there. It says that later. And we're not going to prohibit you, but your job as a lawyer is to be able to evaluate anything that you are submitting, whether it's to a court, to a client, to your supervisor. You cannot effectively evaluate the output of ChatGPT if you do not have the skills yourself. And that we strongly encourage you. We actually have, I should have printed it out. Sorry, I don't have it with me, but we quote from the ABA's recent recommendations on it. We quote from the RPCs on it. So we have a lot of ethical rules embedded in it. And we talk about the ethical rules as they apply to the students. We talk about the ethical rules of keeping keeping up with changes in the law and changes in practice. And then we tell them we think their time is better used learning the skills themselves. We also kind of talk about how it is good for some things. Like, in fact, I will tell you, this morning, I teach second years this semester, and we were doing persuasive writing, and we were talking about theory of the case, and we were brainstorming, and some students told me they were using ChatGPT. Like, I think that's great, right? This is a great use of it because all we're doing is brainstorming and coming up with ideas. I had no problem with that. And then we tell them what it's not good at. It's not very good at legal research yet, although I saw a presentation from Westlaw's new product yesterday. It's getting better. And it's not good at legal analysis. And so my take is our job is to persuade them why that's trying to do it is not trying to have it write their papers for them is just not a very good idea. And that they're going to spend as much time looking at it. Now, that said, kind of your question. So that's our department policy. The person who's teaching LLMs this semester has told them that they may not use it unless it's in connection with a class exercise that she is supervising. She's one of our reference librarians. So that's a different policy there. I find a lot of my students are really afraid of it, that they don't want to use it at all. And then to your question about, well, they've done the actual writing, but they're using it to help smooth their writing. I don't have a problem with that because three things. One, there's loads of products out there ranging from spell check to grammar check to Grammarly to all those things that I think most of us have been letting students use for years. Two, they still have to evaluate it and know if it's doing it well. And three, I've done a lot of prompts where I say, rewrite this paragraph using all active voice. Rewrite this paragraph and add transitions to help smooth out the flow of the writing. It'll do that. If the student knows that that's a problem and it figures out how to fix it, to me, is if they need to know what's wrong to be able to write the prompt, I think that's okay. But that's me, and I know there are people who differ with me on that.
Okay. Now, so the sort of what I guess part of the implication of what I was really asking is if when you talk to your colleague who teaches the LLMs, is the worry, isn't sort of there the worry that if you use it as a teaching tool, that they will run with it to the point where they will ask it to basically generate their work for them, particularly in the case of, say, LLMs who say, yeah, you know what, I'm not really gonna practice in the US. I just want to have that sheepskin and go back home and use it to impress people. So why not? Maybe I can rely on a combination of ChatGPT and Google Translate to get me through law school.
I think that's a legitimate concern. I totally do. That said, I'm always been, whether it's ChatGPT or anything else, I've always been a big proponent of I'd rather do the thing that I'm concerned about them doing with them and show them how to do it and do it well, rather than telling them not to do it at all. And with ChatGPT, it's even more of a concern. So for example, if a student goes out and pulls something off of Wikipedia and puts it in their brief or whatever it is, you can tell. But ChatGPT, we had this conversation back in 22, and actually I should have said we've updated that policy, as things change every year, was that you can never be sure that a student has done this. And really the last thing I would ever want to do is accuse a student of using it when the student hasn't done it themselves. And so sure is it, but I'd rather say like, hey, look, here's how you can use it well. Don't do this. I don't see that as being any different than just saying, don't do this. I see it as being helpful, but they know it's out there. It's not a secret.
Okay, and then I'm going to have one more question, and then we
Sure.
got time for a couple of questions that have shown up in our Q&A section. And the last one I have is, I think it's really interesting for all the things you've been talking about with Register. But if we get out of the area of the Register, are there any other ways you're sort of brainstorming that you could use generative AI with your legal writing students? And particularly to help international students with their writing that maybe connected to Register.
Yeah, so just what I was kind of giving as examples in the last in the last answers, I think if students are identified as having trouble with particular writing techniques. Students write in the passive voice all the time. Student doesn't know how to use a semicolon correctly. Student doesn't use transitions well or uses the same transition over and over again. That learning what their writing issues are and then asking it, not necessarily the whole document. I wouldn't do the whole document, but take a paragraph. And again, the thing I like best, I'm going to emphasize this, is asking ChatGPT, what did you do and why? So can you add transitions to smooth the flow of this writing? And then it will tell you yes. And then it will say, I added this transition because it helps this, or I added this transition because it helps that. Or I've asked it, can you tell me if the sentences in this paragraph are active or passive voice? Some saying students have trouble identifying. So first it can identify and then it can fix. I mean, my pitch all along would be, you want to learn to do it yourself because eventually it's going to be more efficient for you to do it yourself. It's going to be more efficient and better for you to do it yourself. Probably. That may change over time. Right now, with the way the systems are, I think it is. And so you don't want to spend time having it generate and then having you necessarily go back and edit. But if you know you have a certain tendency, it's helpful. I also think it's great, and this is not something I came up with. I've heard this at several different presentations. It's great for not looking at a blank screen. So many students are intimidated by just sitting and looking at a blank screen. So even, just having it make an outline for you, giving it some information. Can you outline this for me? In the Westlaw presentation I saw yesterday, they're going to have a function, it's not out yet, where you can upload a whole lot of documents, factual documents, and it will summarize those documents and make a chronology for you. I would have loved to have had that when I was in practice, where I was, sitting with bankers' boxes of documents and all of that. So I do think that there are things, I'm going to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent, but ages ago, when outsourcing became a thing, and people were panicked that we were going to all lose our jobs, they were all going to go overseas. And there was Laurel and I wrote an article on outsourcing of legal work. And the upshot was, we need to constantly, as lawyers, figure out what our added value as humans and people on the ground dealing with the clients. So you can outsource the research and writing, you can outsource the document review, you can outsource it, but you can't outsource the client relationship. You can't outsource the going into court. You can't outsource the brainstorming, the creativity, all of that. And so to me, as I said, when we started, this is a powerful tool. It is flawed in some ways, but it's powerful, and it's getting more powerful all the time. And we have to figure out how to harness it, how to use it, and then what's the added value that the robots are never, ever going to have.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's move to, I've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A section of the chat. So let's start with them. The first one says that, you showed some templates that ChatGPT came up with. And the question says, when you use these templates to compose your writing, either as an attorney or a student, do you feel that there's a need to indicate that this was aided by generative AI?
I don't. But I haven't done it in practice. I don't, and because I see it like a form book, right? So if you picked up a form book, which we all have done, whether it's for a pleading or for a contract, you don't put a little footnote saying, I use form number X from this particular form book, right? And so I don't. I do see the issue a little bit, and I have seen, one thing I showed my students, there have been some judges, when all of this started coming out and there were hallucinations, some judges, particularly I think federal trial court judges, who now have standing orders saying, if you choose ChatGPT, you need to disclose it for anything that's filed with the court. So I would definitely check to see if I was doing anything where there was a requirement. But in general, if I'm writing like an email to a client and I have ChatGPT help me with a template, no, I don't think so. I mean, I could go on the internet and find an example. I don't think I need to say, here's an example. Or if I got, I went to the supervising attorney and said, hey, do you have an old example of a letter you've written to a client? I don't think I'd have to disclose that either. So I don't see it really as different than those.
Okay. And the next one is, you've talked about how when you've gone around the world and we've seen people who in other countries who use English as a first language in their legal system, they often have very different styles. And what I've seen from many countries, which, well, let's just say countries which shall be remain nameless, tend to be the oratorical style, a
Mhm.
very Victorian style of writing
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
long sentences, passive voice, and these very overwrought phrases. And well, our next writer says the oratorical register generated by AI reminded me of the horrible legalese that's often seen in 1L papers because students think they should
Yep.
sound like lawyers. How do you get the students to understand the distinction between this frozen or oratorical register and just legalese
Yep.
when advancing plain English principles?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and your observations, and I saw that was David's question, are absolutely consistent with my observations, both in terms of my first years and in terms of what I've seen in also many English-speaking countries that I've worked in. So I'm going to go back. I showed that example letter of the lawyer who got the request for the private adoption, and we did sort of the Goldilocks, the too informal, too formal, and too and kind of the just right. And the exercise that we've done very often with students and with lawyers around the world is we put each of those up and we say, look, the recipient's never met this person. What do you think he looks like? And there's a lot of stereotyping there, but the very informal one, they're like, oh, he's a young guy, he's wearing chinos and a polo shirt, and he lives in California, and he's got a surfboard behind his door. And we'll say, like, what does he look like? What does his office look like? How does he treat his staff? And they will come up with, and then with the very formal one, oh, he's an old guy, sorry, and he's got bookcases from mahogany, and he's got all these books, and he has no pictures of his family, and there's not a plant in his office, and he's not that friendly with his legal assistant. And the point we'll say to them is, look at all of this backstory and impression you are creating from one short email. People will do the same thing for you. People will do the same thing for you. And so really hammering that home. And actually, those letters are based on, we've updated them so many times, like for 1,000 years ago, some friend of Laurel's. And it turned out that a real case, that they ended up using the lawyer who was overly formal. And just like David saying, that lawyer was very young and trying to sort of impress with the legalese. And so I think I think it's just a lot of examples. I mean, I don't have a magic bullet on that, but I think it's sort of, what is the impression you're getting? People are going to make decisions for better or for worse, and they may be based on stereotype. For better or for worse, they're going to think about you in a particular way. How do you want them to see you? You want them to see you as professional and serious, but you want them to also see you as kind of, as some of these examples are saying, as human, empathetic. The other thing we've done sort of with those examples is said, would you hire this lawyer in an adoption setting? Some people say yes, no, different ones. Would you hire him for an international business transaction? Right? It may be you might want that more formal person for your international, not the oratorical one, but more formal than an adoption. And so I think just and that's again why I love the Chat GPT, because you can do these things all day and all night with all these different ones, and say, would you hire this one? Would you hire this one? Who do you think this person is? And that sort of thing.
Yeah, and Dana made the point in the last one. It also goes the other way. In addition to the students, maybe from certain countries that have frozen oratorical styles in their legal writing, these days we seem to be getting a lot of students who go the opposite way. They're very informal. Perhaps they've grown up writing text messages and think they can get away with that in a professional setting. And I guess what you've been showing here would be equally useful for them.
Yeah, and I think you can have examples also with the emojis in them, or the you are, that sort of thing. And I've done some of those also, like, you can't do that even in a text to a client. Someone I saw, was it? Oh, here we did the Northwest Regional Conference earlier this fall here, and I can't remember her name, but a professor from Florida was talking about how she lets her students text her, which I do not, but she lets her students text her, but she gives them very specific instructions on what a text to a professor looks like and when it can come, what time of day it can come, what it can be about, what it, and that's very different than the text they might send. So I do think, and I think one of these things, both with our JD students and the LLMs, is sometimes sometimes it's a cultural difference, but that cultural can also be the age. Age is a culture too, and they just don't know. That's all they've ever seen. And so I think, we're teaching them a million things, but I think teaching them like, no, you can't. These people, it's not your friend. And I think one of the things I like about teaching register is it gives me vocabulary. So I can say, you can't, that's an intimate register. You can do that with your friends. You can't do that with me in an email. In fact, the presentation Laurel and I did in Monterey that I'm referencing, that where we started this, was called Hey Prof. And it was called Hey Prof because I was getting emails where I'm like, no, Hey Prof. And so kind of it was coming from that. It's two informal directions. So it definitely does, I agree, come from both directions. And you could
Well,
absolutely.
actually, I once got one that said, "Yo, prof."
Means they like you, but I'm not sure.
Well, on that regard, it's just about coming up on 3 o'clock, and I'm pretty sure that AALS is recording this, and I hope people will be able to view this recording. I'll find out and let everybody know. But we only have an hour, and it's now 3 o'clock, so we're winding up. And Mimi, I want to thank you so much for coming and giving us this really interesting information about what you've been doing with AI to help our international students and domestic 1Ls as well. But and I think everybody's got a lot to think about. So thank you very much. And for everybody in our section, I hope you found this helpful and useful. And we really look forward to seeing you in San Francisco in January, and hopefully next year at the end of May in Global Legal Skills in Brno, Czechia too. So goodbye for today, everybody.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone. I didn't see you. I saw your name, so it's nice to see all of you. Take care.
Bye-bye.